Hotep family, and welcome once again to another edition of Community Cop. My name is Noel, leader, one of the co-founding members of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. I'm here today with only one of my co-hosts, Michael Graves, aka Big Mike.
Namaste.
And we'd like to welcome you, our viewing audience. Unfortunately, Julian Harper's on Community Cop assignment, won't be joining us this week, but we're glad to be back. I was on assignment for a couple of weeks, and we once again thank you, Michael Graves, for holding down Community Cop with very important information. We got a lot of positive feedback. So now we're two of us back, and this is where truth and real talk begins and occurs. So we like to start off as we normally do with our historical piece. And Michael reminded us today was ancestor Harriet Tubman's. She made her transition. It's not known when her birthday actually was, but she made her transition on March 10th, 1913. Michael, remind our viewing audience about this great shero.
Oh, certainly. This is Black Women's History Month, and I would be remiss if I didn't first mention a great giant in the United African Movement, Judy McNeil, who passed 3 years ago around this time. And Judy McNeil was one who held UAM dearly in her heart. She was one of the greatest supporters we've ever had. She made sure everybody could get their bus tickets to get on the bus, made sure everything was copacetic. If we needed any funding for anything, she used to buy books and pass them out to members. Such a beautiful spirit, just a beautiful sister, and she did so much. And certainly, Brother Leonard, you should be proud of your mother because she did so much for our people. And she always led us in song. She always opened with the great song, Lift Every Voice and Sing, written by James Weldon Johnson, you know, the Black national anthem. So in that same spirit, it's no question that Harriet Tubman we're in rarefied air when we talk about her. She was a fierce fighter for our freedom. She was in the Army in the Civil War. She was a spy. I think she had the rank unofficially as a sergeant. She did so much for our people. She was not treated properly. It took her years and years to finally get her pension from the Army for the role she played in the Civil War. But she was a former enslaved African that fought for her freedom. Incredible, the amount of people, some estimate well over 300 and over 19 trips to the Deep South, bringing people out. So long live that beautiful, magnificent warrior, Queen Warrior, Harriet Tubman.
All right, and in that same vein, we like to acknowledge another sister warrior, a shero of ours, Sister Fannie Lou Hamer, who was famous for saying that she was tired of being sick and tired. She made a transition on March 14th, 1977. Remind our viewing audience of this great and heroic shero.
Oh, she was incredible. She was one of those Black women of many that grew up a sharecropper, which is an extension of slavery. She grew up that way, became a fierce fighter for civil rights and human rights. She was undaunted in her quest to get the right to vote. For our people, she was just it would just be hard to describe her impact on this sister that used to just sharecrop and worked in the field so hard to become a leader of our people and to fight the good fight and demanded that the Mississippi Democratic Party acknowledge the Freedom Party that started in Mississippi. She was just incredible. And I'll tell you one point that she had a fight, and the fight did involve the great Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who viewed his role as fighting for all Black people, but she wanted to be seated, even though he did say to her that he could represent the Black people in Mississippi, but she said to him, "You never picked cotton." And so she had to, and she was right. That's one of the few positions that Adam Clayton Powell misconstrued her position, even though he was clear on who he was, because he even asked her, "Do you know who I am?" And she said, "Mr. Powell, I'm well aware of who you are, but you've never picked cotton, so I have to represent Mississippi." So strong sister, great character, and we need more like her.
All right, and as you stated earlier, reminded for our viewing audience, this is Black Women's History Month, and our history is replete with heroic, innovative, brave women of African descent who have made great sacrifices and contribute greatly to the elevation of our people in this country and throughout the diaspora. So we salute all African women, those named and unnamed, those known and unknown, who have contributed.
And Noel,
yes, sir.
You might want to mention that in one of the times she was jailed, that she was beaten and never fully recovered from a beating that she had. And after the officers were tired of beating her, they made the actual inmates there beat her, or they would risk beating themselves. And so they even beat on her, and her legs fully recovered from a severe beating that took a long period of time.
Yes, and that's only more evidence of her sacrifice on behalf. And all she wanted to do was invoke her constitutional right to be able to vote. And not only her, but also her kith and kin. So she struggled to get the ability to vote. And for that, she received so much beatings and oppression, exploitation, and anger, et cetera, et cetera. And she sacrificed greatly. So you're definitely correct in acknowledging our shero and ancestor, Fannie Lou Hamer. All right, fast forward to today. There's two stories before we talk about some current news of some stories that we've covered here on Community Cop, but we just like to refresh our audience. Some of you may remember the case of Breonna Taylor, who was murdered and shot by police officers as they attempted to execute a no-knock warrant. Her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who had a licensed weapon, fired through the door because he didn't know the individuals banging on his door were police officers. And for that, he was charged with attempted murder. Well, this Monday, he was exonerated of all criminal charges. They had decided not to press charges against him. So we're happy for that, although our sister Breonna Taylor has yet to receive justice on her own. Michael, many in our community and many outside of our community felt that he shouldn't have been charged at all or even threatened with the charge. Do you see this as a victory?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. And I know you're being rhetorical and
Yes,
asking a question because the actual officers that killed her are not on trial. You know, the person that's on trial is a person who shot, who's being charged with the reckless shooting that rounds went into actually another apartment. So it's good that her fiance was not charged and they dropped the charges of attempted murder of a police officer, which is proof positive that no-knock warrant, the way they approached that house was unjustified, because there's no way in the world they would have dropped the charges of attempted murder of a police officer had he not been in the right and had they not been grossly incorrect in their entrance into that house.
And Michael, you bring up a good point that we talked about here before on Community Cop, which is not mentioned when discussing this particular case, is that no-knock warrant. As you stated, if they proceeded with the prosecution of this individual, Kenneth Walker, they would have had to discuss the application that was filed before the judge, what we find was perjury, was lied. The officer lied in his application to get a no-knock warrant. We discussed on Community Cop that there's presently a Black officer in Houston, Texas, who's being charged with murder because he lied on his application to the judge to get a no-knock warrant, where a white man and a white woman who were selling drugs in their apartment were shot and killed by police officers who went in their house with a no-knock warrant. They fired and the police returned fire, but killing both of them. Because this Black officer allegedly lied on his application to the judge for the no-knock warrant, and because someone died in the course of the execution of this no-knock warrant, he's being charged with murder. The same thing, the identical thing happened in this particular case, Breonna Taylor's case. The officers lied, according to the postal inspector. The officers told the judge that they were told by the postal inspector that they delivered drugs to this house. The post office did. The postal inspector said, I never told the officers that. So the officer lied on his application to the judge. Therefore, he should also be charged with murder like the Black officer in Houston, Texas is. So if they went forward with the prosecution of this brother, Kenneth Walker, I'm pretty sure that topic of the application to the judge would have been brought up. The special prosecutor, when he exonerated the officers, he opened up his statement by saying he's not going to talk about the search warrant. The FBI was supposed to be looking into it. We haven't heard from them yet. So it's clear to me that they just want to sweep this under the carpet. But once again, not only as it relates to the death of our sister Breonna Taylor, but we see as it relates to the prosecution of officers, the Black officer who did the same thing that the white officer did in this particular case as it relates to the application to the judge is being charged with murder. To date, not one officer is being charged with murder in the death of Breonna Taylor.
If memory serves me, that special prosecutor you mentioned, his name is Daniel Cameron.
Right.
And so many, at least several jurors after it said that there was a lot of information that wasn't presented and he never gave them options, they would have changed their decisions, and those officers who actually killed her would have been charged had they had that option. But the way he charged them and guided them through the process, he was actually covering up. And this is why now Mitch McConnell has said that if he chooses not to run again, or if he steps down early, he wants Daniel Cameron to be his replacement. He's appealing to a Democratic governor that does not have to do it, but he's just making that request, and he's trying to get the legislature to make sure that it's a Republican. But again, Daniel Cameron is not a man. He's a coward. He's a Black traitor. He's not only a traitor to the race, he's disgusting to the profession of law itself. He's a disgrace to the statute of law, and it just shows you why he is so favored by McConnell and others, because he's a traitor to the race.
That's right. And his treachery, as I said, is clear when you look at this video and the way he handled this particular case. It definitely wasn't in good faith. He wasn't seeking justice. He was looking to exonerate the police officers that were involved and responsible for our sister's death. All right. Another story we wanted to update before we talk about some current issues is that jury selection was halted yesterday in the prosecution of Officer Derek Chauvin. He's the officer that has been charged with the murder of George Floyd after putting his knee on his neck and killing him placing his knee on his neck for almost 9 minutes, which resulted in the death of George Floyd. Well, the prosecutor wanted to add a third-degree murder charge to his charges, and that halted the selection of the jury. Now, some of us are, based on the video, believe that there is no way in the world that this officer is not going to be convicted of murder because his guilt is apparent. His callousness is not even debatable, and his activities, his actions resulted in the death of an individual unarmed. So some of us are convinced that this officer will be convicted. But remember the case of Walter Scott, who's a white officer, Officer Michael Slager, who's a white officer who shot Walter Scott in the back. This was caught on video. And, when the jury got the case, one white jurist refused, in spite of the explanation of the law, that it was unjustified to shoot a fleeing felon or a fleeing suspect in the back. Brother Walter Scott wasn't even a felon. But this white jurist refused to indict, to convict this police officer. I don't believe that it's far-fetched to believe that the same thing can happen in the case of Derek Chauvin. In spite of the fact that there's a video, in spite of the fact that his callousness is not even debatable, in spite of the fact that everyone around the globe says the officer is guilty, all they need is one jurist to refuse to convict the police officer, and we'll have a mistrial. Michael, now, everyone's waiting in bated breath for this particular case to proceed through the criminal process. What do you feel about what I just said in terms of his guilt being non-debatable?
Oh, I agree. And to further buttress your point, certainly the one you pointed out is an excellent case to look at, the case with Walter Scott, because that white jurist said, I couldn't do it. I saw what you saw, but I refused to send a white police officer to jail for killing a black man. Thank God for that brother from the Dominican Republic who recorded it, even though he was threatened with deportment. Law enforcement told him, because that's the way law enforcement do. While they're gathering facts, they have other police officers who are going to tell you indirectly off the record, you're going to be deported if you testify against that police officer. The video is you've already given up the video, but you have to testify to make it legit. And but he did it anyway. He said he had to do it. So thank that brother from DR for testifying and providing that information. And I would just say that, and I agree with you, that it doesn't matter how many people saw this. The entire world saw what happened to George Floyd for those 8 minutes and I think 46
seconds.
That's all it takes. And it's no case. So all it takes is, for whatever reason, and I believe that's why they continued and had that third degree added, just in case a person cannot muster enough courage to find that police officer guilty.
All right. Well, we'll be watching the process, the progress of this particular trial, and I'm sure many of you will be watching, and we'll see what the ultimate outcome is, which also includes the makeup of the jury. I'm pretty certain that his attorneys will attempt to knock off as many Black potential jurists as he possibly can, because they don't feel that, the reason is self-evident. All right, so fast forward into today. Michael, I know we want to talk about a recent case that happened with an officer, Delvin White. He's a Tampa, Florida police officer, of African-American descent, who was caught while on duty using the N-word on more than one occasion. Of course, all police departments have a policy where that's unacceptable behavior, not only for white officers, but for all officers. Police officers have to understand, when they do put on the uniform, they're mandated to be professional, not only in their actions, but also in their speech. It's not appropriate for anyone to use that particular word when referring to anyone, especially the public. So he was let go. He was terminated because I believe his camcorder caught him using the N-word on a number of instances. Michael, why don't you elaborate further on the situation of Officer Delvin White?
Well, I don't know. As fate would have it, his body cam went off because or if it was on, he was unaware that it was on, and he was engaged. He was a school resource officer on that tour of duty, and what he did was he was on the phone. There were people around, and he was conversating on the phone, and he referred to somebody as, quote unquote, a ghetto nigger. And it was heard, and that's what started the investigation, because not only did he use the N-word, but he attached ghetto to it. And the second time was doing an arrest. He referred to somebody with the N-word. Consequently, it provoked an investigation, and the police commissioner Dugan said that police officers have to be judged by a higher standard. Therefore, a black man, an 8-year veteran, was fired. Now, they have a loophole in it, in that in Tampa, they said you can't use the N-word except in extenuating circumstances. Now, I don't know what that is. In other words, is it a moment of passion, or is it that a white cop can get away with it? Because a black cop, an 8-year veteran, couldn't get away with saying the words ghetto nigger. So when they said, with the exception of extenuating circumstances, you're going to be held to a higher standard. So I think extenuating circumstances might mean white privilege, but I'm not sure. You could take it from here.
Well, listen, that word is never acceptable. I'm not certain with the officer. I believe the officer's attorney made some simplistic comment that he used it in a way that the word is now used today, and in a non-disrespectful manner, which is no one's buying that. That word is appropriate. I mean, if he wants to make a rap album, because it seems as if many distributors, tolerate African Americans using that word. I mean, I would like to see a rap. Well, I'm not going to say I would like to see, but I know before it's even stated that if a rap artist used the word gook or mick or kike or cracker, repeatedly in their lyrics, that record wouldn't make it to the public. But evidently in the rap world, you could use the N-word. So perhaps this officer got a little misguided in thinking it was okay. It's inappropriate to use at all times, but especially if you're a professional police officer and you have the uniform, you shouldn't be using that word. I don't care if you're African American or if you're Caucasian. So I'm like you, Michael. I don't understand what the extenuating circumstances should be, because as I stated, if you use any of the derogatory terms to describe any other ethnic group, are those words okay to use in extenuating circumstances as well? I doubt it.
Right.
So kudos to the brother. Perhaps you can get a career if you insist on using that word in the rap industry, but you definitely don't deserve to wear the uniform. All right. Also, Michael, the FBI, Christopher Wray, was asked a question if he thought the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was a racist institution. Now, of course, I want to hear your comments before I say anything, but in my judgment, the history of the FBI speaks for himself. But elaborate further on this particular question, and how did Christopher Wray respond to this interesting question?
Okay, now the question was raised at the Senate Judiciary Committee investigating January the 6th. So during that discussion, he was asked by Republican Senator John Kennedy, is the FBI a systematically racist institution? And he said it wasn't. He said, no, it's not. He said, however, the FBI needs to be more diverse and much more inclusive. Now, if you just said it's not racist, but it needs to be more diverse, you're getting ahead of the next question. Because the next question would be, can you give us the numbers? So you get ahead of that question by you saying it needs to be more diverse and it needs to be more inclusive, and we're working hard to make it more inclusive. And we're gonna work harder to make it more diverse. That's what his answer was. Now he's disregarding literally close to well over 90 years of racist history, going back to Marcus Garvey. So I know that's probably where you're going when you start talking about the attack on Black leaders. So I'll let you go with that, but I'll just say that he knows full well that diversity is not a priority in the FBI. It never has been, and to date, it still isn't. Because if they wanted to hire FBI agents that were Black, they can go to the very same colleges they get the white ones from. I didn't say different colleges. You can go to the same ones, or you can go to historically Black colleges. But when you go to prestigious white universities and inquire as to, does any of those white guys want a career in the FBI, and they always get people, you can go to those same places and get Black people. I don't recall any lines, any Black scholars or Black graduates saying, no, I don't want to be an FBI agent. I don't think they've had that opportunity.
And this is a current theme in all law enforcement agencies and institutions throughout this nation. There's a lack of diversity, especially as it relates to African Americans. I don't care if you talk about the New York City Police Department or other departments throughout the nation. You talk about the FBI, you talk about the DEA, you talked about the CIA, and practically every law enforcement agency in this country, there's a lack of diversity, especially as it relates to African Americans. And I believe the reason is because we're targeted by this agency so often, they don't feel comfortable with having us around. So it's not, as you stated, Mike, it's not a lack of ability to recruit African-American agents in that FBI, it's a lack of will. They really don't want us there. They really don't want us in many law enforcement police departments or these other agencies that I mentioned. But as you stated, Michael, the FBI record is not even debatable in terms of its hostility and racism against the African-American community, in particular, Black leaders and Black organizations. And it extends back to the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. He was targeted by the FBI. He wasn't a threat to the nation. His objective was to organize and unify Black people. The FBI is against the organization and the unification of African Americans. The FBI targeted the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad was no threat to the nation. He never encouraged his members to carry weapons or to attack anybody. But Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam was for the organization and the unification of the African American community. And the FBI is against that. That's why they attacked it. The FBI was against Martin Luther King, considered him to be public enemy number one. Martin Luther King wasn't a threat to this nation. He just wanted the enforcement of the rights of African Americans in his country and for us to be treated like first-class citizens. And for that, he was targeted by the FBI. So it's not even debatable the history or the racist position of the FBI as it relates to African American community. They have always been against African Americans, the African American community in particular, leaders and organizations. They have always been racist. So any answer to that question other than yes is political theater. The FBI has been racist, is racist, and is always going to be a racist institution.
That's right. The leaders, everybody from, as you said, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, MLK Jr., Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party,
Nick, Core,
all of them. They first of all, Hoover bragged that there's an agent behind every mailbox. So he wanted you to be leery. He wanted you to be insecure with respect to anything you was doing inside of your organization. He boasted that there's an FBI agent planted in every organization when he eventually started hiring Blacks. He sent a letter congratulating the special agent in charge of the Chicago branch of the FBI for creating turmoil between the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Minister Malcolm X. So these things are documented, and that the distrust between the Black Panther Party and the organization US that was led by Milana Karenga was orchestrated by the FBI. They tried to get the Black Stone Rangers and the Black Panther Party to fight in Chicago with the use of letters and telephone calls and putting out information, daring each other to make a move at each other. So it's a long history that the FBI has to look at. And then the counterintelligence program. You have to look at that. And then even recently under Director Comey, Black, what is it called? Black identity extremists. Mm-hmm. He called it. Comey was so vicious that Comey said that when the 9 Blacks in Mother Emanuel Church was killed, he said that wasn't a terrorist act. Now, if that's not a terrorist act, I don't know what a terrorist act is.
True.
And unfortunately, President Obama said nothing. Now, President Obama is his boss. Eric Holder was his boss.
Facts.
Loretta Lynch was his boss. But when he said it was not a terrorist act, he said it was a horrible act, but it was not an act of terrorism. Why didn't Obama, the president, or why didn't the attorney general at that time, which I believe was either Holder or Loretta Lynch, why didn't they step in and say that was a domestic terrorist act? They let somebody under them, an inferior officer, tell a superior officer what the situation was. And that only shows you how racist the FBI is.
Right, and you bring up so many good points, Michael, one of which I want to talk about again as it relates to the COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, which targeted many African Americans who were engaged in any criminality whatsoever. You know, that in and of itself would prove, because the records of the FBI, the activities, the objectives, the plan, the individuals they sought to neutralize, it's in black and white. You know, this is not us pontificating, us guessing what happened. They documented their activities. They documented the targeting of individuals like Martin Luther King, you know, sending him a letter, hoping that he would commit suicide. That came from the FBI. Right. You know, this information, this history is documented. The animus, the animosity that this Federal Bureau of Investigation have shown towards members of the African American community is documented. So it's not even debatable. So when you hear white men ask each other about racism, about white supremacy, you know, we just have to sit back and laugh and ignore the response, because all of them are in denial. All of them believe in recidivist rewriting history. And as you know, Frederick Douglass once said, revisionist history, you know, as the great Frederick Douglass once said, that America has a history that, if truthfully told, would embarrass a nation of savages. So yes, indeed, the FBI has been racist, is racist, and in my judgment, they're always going to be racist. And failure to acknowledge the documented history, you know, only shows us that, you know, nothing's going to change, because nothing will change unless you acknowledge that it has to change, that there is a problem. As long as you ignore the problem or deny the problem, then nothing's going to change. So my comment is correct.
And I appreciate that you brought up those letters to Dr. King, a preacher.
Right.
Not to a bank robber. He wasn't a bank robber. He wasn't a murderer out here killing people. He wasn't a terrorist. He was a preacher. He was the Prince of Peace.
Yes, sir.
He was trying to civilize, as you saying, a barbarian state. You know, he was trying to bring civility and peace and allow our people the rights to vote like anyone else that the Constitution guarantees. It was Hoover that said he was the most dangerous man in America. Now, at the same time, he felt that same way about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad also, but later on, after Malcolm was killed, he put all his eggs in one basket and said, Dr. King has to be stopped with that threat of a Black Messiah. But again, Comey never called Dylann Roof a domestic terrorist, because now he would be forced to investigate him. And that would mean all of these associates, the Civil War flag, Nazi flags, and all those different associations that Dylann Roof was involved with, these militias, would have to be investigated. And Comey didn't want to open up a can of worms. And President Obama, who's an attorney also, knew that obviously Loretta Lynch and Eric Holder are attorneys. They knew that. They knew how to conduct a proper investigation. And if they didn't know, they could have asked 100 blacks in law enforcement, how do you do an investigation? And we could have done it for them.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. All right. Let's fast forward to something that's happening in New York State. Those you watching the program may know that Governor Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, is having some difficulties. There are calls for him to step down from his governorship. There's 5 women who have come forward and say that he has behaved to them in an unprofessional, sexual manner. They accuse him of sexual abuse. Of course, there's a controversy in his administration that his administration changed or played around with the death numbers of seniors that were killed in the senior center, and that his policy even contributed to the deaths of many seniors. He denied the number by at least 50% or close to 50%. So now there's a lot of backlash. There's calls for him to step down. Michael, as I stated to you earlier, this is like the chicken coming home to roost. Some of you may remember that here on Community Cop, we talked about the conspiracy to stop then Governor David Paterson, who was the first Black mayor, governor of New York State. There was conspiracy to get him to agree not to run. And we, on this program, told you that we held Governor Andrew Cuomo responsible for that conspiracy to get him, David Paterson, not to seek to run for office, to maintain an office. He wasn't elected the first time. He got into the governorship because Eliot Spitzer, had to step down. But we believe that Governor Cuomo was behind the conspiracy and encouraged the media, politicians, and even so-called Black leaders to coach and to encourage David Paterson not to run. The initial calls was for him to step down. We held a press conference that Michael led, and he articulately spoke on this conspiracy that we felt that was targeting our first Black governor at the time. And now Governor Cuomo is victimized by the same calls for him to step down. I'm not going to get his back. I hear some people talking about Democrats are throwing stones at a Democratic governor and that Trump might be behind this. I say it's chicken comes home to roost. Governor Cuomo conspired against then David Paterson to stop him from running, for governorship. And now he's experiencing the same thing. So I say he should be removed. The calls for him to step down shouldn't stop. And chicken coming home to roost is always a good thing.
Well, I'll say this now. I might have led that press conference, but I have to admit, Noel, you was the one that told me early on that you believe that these salacious stories that we were reading about in the newspaper were coming from the New York State Attorney General's office. And I said, I don't know, brother. I don't know about that, man. Let's just wait and see. But you was right. Andrew Cuomo did not want to wait. He wanted to make sure that David Paterson didn't run again because the Democratic Party could not afford for the 2 top Democrats in the state to be engaged in a war over who would be governor. They told Cuomo, the leadership, that he had to wait, but he didn't want to wait. And he made the proper assessment to know what David Paterson was made of. And he said, if I put some pressure on him, I'll make him bow down. And as you well know, they were able with pressure, using salacious stories about sexual activity, drug activity, they were able to get him to step away from the budget. That's part of his, fiduciary responsibility to do the budget for New York State. And they got what's his name, Ravitch.
Yeah.
Ravitch did the budget in the governor's place. Who ever heard of that? That was unprecedented. So they knew that David Paterson, who was a gentleman and a real nice person, a real decent, good brother, they put pressure on him, and that pressure, as you aptly, the first one I know of that knew where this was being generated from, it was the New York State Attorney General's office. And it was Andrew Cuomo. So you are absolutely right when you say the chickens are coming home to roost, because he was the one behind putting out these stories about David Paterson.
And what sealed my suspicion and our suspicion of him being behind it, Michael, I know you remember when we were going to the state office building to convene our press conference, we got a phone call,
Yeah.
both of us got a phone call from the governor's, from the Attorney General's office at the time, asking us not to do the press conference, calling for everyone to take a step back from calling for David Paterson to step down. That was our call in that particular day, but we got calls from the Attorney General Cuomo's office. We had just so coincidentally met with some of them a few weeks before this happened regarding stop, question, and frisk. We were trying to get that ceased in New York City. And we got a call saying something to the effect that if we didn't do the press conference, then the state Attorney General's office was willing to do something about our calls for the cessation of these illegal stop, question, and frisk. So that was it. That knocked it off the bat. When I think we were both pulling up to the state office building in Harlem, we got the phone call. And
we were in different cars. You got to tell
we was in two different cars.
You was in your car, I was in my car.
Right. And we both got the phone call.
When we met at the Harlem State office building, I said, you won't believe who I got a call from. And you said, well, you won't believe who I got a call from. We both got calls from the Attorney General's office saying, I know y'all guys want to stop, question, and frisk. If you don't support David Paterson and you don't do the press conference, we will stop it for you. Right. They said we can put the NYPD in receivership today. Just don't support David Paterson. No other Black organizations are supporting him. And you know yourself that the meeting in Sylvia, it would take too long for us to discuss all the things that led up to that. But you know they had a meeting in Sylvia's, and you know that they were looking for a thumbs down, saying that right now Albany is ungovernable, therefore Paterson has to step down. And you know the leaders who were involved in that. They were meeting with Cuomo on a daily basis, and they were receiving instructions from Cuomo. Black leaders, Black elected officials, and Black civil rights leaders were being told that David Paterson has to go. And they was following orders with the steps that they were taking. And the Black media followed suit, the people that's in place on radio and TV to raise questions about David Paterson. And they were all lies.
Right, that's right. And then once he agreed not to run again, everything stopped. You know,
everything disappeared.
Right, when you joined that with our press conference as well, because as you say, we was the only organization that said that David Paterson should not step down because he hasn't been convicted of anything. But you know, be it as it may, that's a very interesting history. That's why we say, as it relates to Governor Cuomo now, yeah.
If we ever did a show on the people who was involved in what they did, it would be explosive and it would be very, very revealing on the people that were involved in David Paterson's demise, right, because they would have you think that they were friends of his.
Right. So I think you're trying to say that we got more than one phone call, Michael, but that's for another time.
Yes.
Because we did get other phone calls for some Black folks.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, our next story is Barack Obama, Michael, as some of you may know on the airways, that citizen Barack Obama has reversed his position on reparations for African Americans. Members in the African American community has been calling for reparations for generations. And when Barack Obama was president, you can hear a pin drop on the subject. But now citizen Barack Obama has stated that he's in favor of African Americans receiving reparations. Michael.
Well, you know, John Conyers, going back as far as 1989, 1990, had submitted H.R. 40, which was a reparations act. And you know full well that it never reached the floor. The bill that was submitted never reached the floor. And now you have Sheila Jackson and Cory Booker submitting a similar bill, but this one is just to study and discuss reparation. You don't have to study it.
Exactly.
This reparation goes back 4 centuries. Just in case Cory Booker fell on his head as a baby, and maybe Sheila Jackson, she might have fell on her head as a baby, and they don't know that there was a system of African enslavement that went on for centuries. And just in case they don't know that, just in case they don't know about the convict leasing program after slavery was abolished, just in case they don't know about Jim Crow, just in case they don't know about miseducation, just in case they don't know about the political prisoners that we have, and they don't know about with respect to war, the soldiers who were mistreated, and all these various world wars. If they don't know about the teachers, the mistreatment, the teachers' salaries, all sorts of discrimination, and they're saying it should be discussed. It needs to be studied. What do you have to study? We can find 6th and 8th graders that can tell you why we should have reparations. And I'm not even suggesting what form it should be in. I'm just saying that who on this planet is more deserving of reparations than us?
Right. And for those who may not know, the definition of reparations is the making of amends for wrong that was done. That's the definition of reparations, the making of amends for wrong that was done. Now, was a wrong done? That's not even debatable. You know, as you stated, Michael, the enslavement of Africans and the history after enslavement is documented. You know, so the wrong was done. So now I would like to see a person that say that African Americans do not deserve amends for that wrong. You know, when you look at the great horror that was experienced as our people, you know, by our ancestors. And, you know, this is by a government that is still around today. There was insurance companies back then that are still around today, that are doing business today, that profited off the slave trade. There are universities and colleges that use slave labor that are around today.
Go ahead,
there are
brother.
banks. There are banks that benefit off of the slave trade, off of slavery, that are around today. There's shipping companies.
Go ahead, brother.
There's insurance companies. There's train companies. There's a whole lot of corporations and companies that existed and benefited and profited off of the enslavement of African people that are still around today. So some people try to act as if everyone involved is gone, everyone has suffered is gone. No, sir.
Take it home, brother. Take it home.
Yeah, exactly. There are individuals
Take it
around.
home, brother. Go ahead.
There are individuals around, corporations and companies around today, universities, banks, insurance companies around today that benefited off of the enslavement of African people. So the subject or the subject of reparations definitely, should be made and fought. And like you said, Mike, there's no reason to study it. There's been studies. We've had studies. The history is documented. We deserve to be paid amends for the wrong that was done to our ancestors.
Look, and I'm not saying, and I'm not going to compare pain, but you know full well that who can deny Native Americans reparations?
Right.
They deserve something. I know they didn't get what they deserved because this country was theirs.
Right.
I know that the so-called Holocaust, the European Holocaust, that occurred in Europe.
Yes.
It didn't occur here, but they got reparations from Germany and a whole lot of other countries. Well, I would say, why not us? The same government, as you said, that was in existence then, is in existence now. So all of those who benefited, when you say benefit, you're talking about profit. You're
Yes,
talking
sir.
about power, prestige, and money.
Yes.
They are stronger now than they were then, these corporations. So if they benefited on free labor for centuries, why is it so outrageous and ominous for us to discuss reparations now? So I don't think that it should just be regulated to a discussion, a frank discussion, or a study. Why at this late date would Cory Booker and Sheila Jackson submit something requesting a study for something that they know? It's in their DNA. They know about it already. We know about it already. I mean, Roots was out over 40 years ago.
That's
so
right.
Come on.
Right, that's right.
It's
And
nothing to study.
this is an attempt to procrastinate the issue. To study this, I don't know how many years they're going to study. Then they're going to put together a proposal, a paper that has to be discussed. This is just an attempt to put this away. And of course, individuals who engage in the study is going to make millions of dollars. It's going to be millions of dollars go towards this so-called study. It's not a study is definitely not necessary. You know, the crime is apparent. The history is already documented, and we're not only talking about free labor. We're talking about the millions and millions of murdered people that were murdered during the enslavement of our ancestors. You know, the millions. You know, so you know, as I stated, if you look at the definition of reparations, the making of amends that wrong was done, it's not something that needs to be studied because the history is already there. You know, but this is, as I stated,
King Leopold, he killed between what, 10 and 15 million Africans himself.
Congo. Right.
Right, in the Congo. So, and then we could do a show just on massacres here in America. Inside the boundaries of America, we could talk about massacre after massacre, where thousands was killed, not only by the government, thousands were killed by white mobs, by law enforcement authorities all over the country. This went on, and then convict leasing, that was part of the government. State governments were allowed to do that. From slavery all the way to the 1930s, it was never addressed until FDR. And that was pressure from the NAACP and other Black leadership finally said, you gotta look at convict leasing. They're little boys, 9, 10 years old, that are in jail for nothing, that are men that have been in jail 10, 15, 20 years that did absolutely nothing, and they were charged with vagrancy and things like that. And they had to give their whole adult life building for others, free labor and convict leasing. So we have more than enough ground, and there should be no study.
Exactly, and the history is not even debatable. All right, there's a coach. You know, we're talking about the enslavement of Africans. There's a coach in Creighton, who was recently terminated because when he addressed his mostly African American basketball players, he told them to stay on the plantation. Now, I think this is a high school coach. It's high school, right, Mike?
No, he's college.
He's college? Okay.
A college coach that is being well paid. He's being paid millions of dollars to coach Creighton University.
Right. He said to his Black players that they should stay on the plantation. Now, this is language that is inexcusable. We talked about the horrors of the enslavement of African people. I'm certain, as you stated, Mike, a college instructor is aware of this horrific history. So to use such insensitive language to students that is under his, you know, that his subordinates, that he probably helped get scholarships, to demean them in such a fashion is unforgivable. And as I know for a fact that if a coach of another ethnic group did it to any other ethnic group except for African Americans, he definitely wouldn't be permitted to return. Now, Michael, you said that he was allowed to return to his job. I know there was a great movement of support for this particular individual, but update our family on this particular story, Mike.
Well, they said that he said to them basically to motivate them, I need you on the plantation. You cannot leave the plantation. You have to remain on the plantation. Now, I've heard of things people say, something like all hands on deck, or all for one for all to motivate, or let's give it all we got. I've never heard any a player gets motivated by, I need you on the plantation. I want you on the plantation. You cannot leave the plantation. Who does that motivate? That's some deep-seated hatred for the Black man and woman to speak like that. Now, he's not from Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee. He's not from the backwoods or hills of Tennessee or somewhere. His whole area, his whole life has been Montana, Idaho, North Dakota, all of those places. And he's now, I think, in Ohio somewhere. But in any event, he's from the Midwest, up there, up north, near Canada. So I don't know if they even call their farms up there plantations. I think they refer to them as farms. So where did he get this plantation from?
Yes.
That's deep-seated and that's historical. So for him to pretend he didn't know that it was offensive and he was suspended one game, he's going to be coaching now in the Big East, in the Big East tournament. So with all that he did, he was suspended for one game. That only shows you that white privilege is just a priority, white privilege.
And Mike, let me ask you real quick before we do our closing comments, and ask honestly, and I want our viewing audience to consider this question as well. Do you think this coach would use the same language if he was talking to an all-white basketball team?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
He would say, all hands on deck. Come on, guys, let's go. Wake up, let's go.
He definitely wouldn't use the language about staying on the plantation, you know. But closing comments, Mike.
Just want to just say again, we love Judy McNeil, her contributions at United African Movement. And let me say, brother, personally, it's just good to have you back. Love the work that you and Julian are doing. And our people will benefit greatly from y'all being on community cop assignment. Y'all have trained me well to keep the ship going until your return. And just want to say again, Black man, Black woman, protect the Black child, accept your own, and be yourself.
All right, then you do an excellent job, Michael. We really appreciate your ability because it's not easy. Some people may think it's easy to hold it down by yourself, and you do it on it, very frequently, and we appreciate that. But on behalf of Community Cop, we'd like to thank our producers and engineers, Veronica Kitt, Sheila Berry, Nat Woods, Big D. We'd like to thank you, our viewing audience. And we ask when you do watch us on YouTube, because you can catch the program on YouTube, that you do like and you do subscribe to our channel, and then ask some questions and comment, or go to our Facebook page and ask some comments or questions or some subject that you might want us to talk about. But we appreciate our viewing audience, our faithful audience. We appreciate the time we have to share of some topics from our vantage point, because it doesn't happen every day, unfortunately. So we ask that you continue to support the program, and we like to thank a special thank once again to our producers. Lenny Lou, I love you. Little Mo, I love you. Kitty Cat, all our viewing audience. Julian, we miss you. Harper family, the Graves family, Community Cop family. Peace. See you next week.